Hello, beautiful person. I am so happy to see you again on this blazing hot day in Winnipeg. My name is Hadassah Viatar, and I am working my way through this book, which I know it's reversed. Still looking for someone who can tell me how to flip the screen on my iPhone so that I can show it properly. Hey, Kim, hello. And this book by Carol Dweck has had a really, hi Selena, has had a really huge effect on people's thinking. It came out in 2006, but it's been really amazing book. And I'm working my way through it. I've been putting my notes in a Google Doc, and if you would like access to this Google Doc so that you can get my cliff notes on this, then just drop me a message. I'll be happy to give you access to it. So this is part of the 14-day challenge. I'm now on day 11. Woo-hoo, almost done. And I've been working my way through this book. And today the chapter that I'm talking about is chapter 7. I started it yesterday, which was about, it's called Parents, Teachers, and what was that chapter called? Parents, Teachers, and Coaches. Where do mindsets come from? Now these chapters are really dense, so there's no way I can go through a whole chapter in a live video. But so yesterday I started talking about parents and the way they sometimes put their expectations on their kids. And just to remind you about the mindsets, a fixed mindset is one in which we think that everything is fixed, talent, and ability. If you're not a natural, then there's no point in even trying. And people who have a fixed mindset very often are constantly in need of validation. They're afraid to take on new challenges because then they might look stupid. Okay, if you are praised and admired for being smart and talented, then if people are afraid that if they show that they actually need to work at something or that they can make mistakes, that people will no longer respect them. And more importantly, that people will no longer love them. So it's a big deal. A growth mindset is one in which we believe that we can grow our ability, our talent, our intelligence by working hard, by trying different strategies, and by getting good teaching. So today I'm going to talk about good teaching and what it's about, because a fixed mindset in a teacher can really be a problem for the students. And we want to foster growth mindsets in the students. So yesterday I was talking about parents. Today I'm going to talk about teachers, and in particular 3 great teachers that Dr. Dweck talks about. I have heard of them before. Marva Collins was a teacher who worked in the inner city of Chicago with children who were basically chewed up and spit out by the educational system and were basically given up on. And she was able to get incredible work out of these kids. She had them discussing Shakespeare and so on. And she did this by never giving up on them. She had extremely high standards. She didn't dump things down for them. But she told them that if they were willing to work, she would teach them and they would learn. That's like nobody had ever said that to them before, and amazing things happened. The second one is a guy called Rafe Esquith. In fact, when I was in the education program at U of W, I learned about this guy. He wrote a book called Teach Like Your Hair is on Fire, and it basically comes down to the same thing. And he worked with Los Angeles second graders from poor areas that are rife with crime. So these are kids who come from homes with a lot of problems. There might be drugs, there might be mental illness, there might be crime in their homes. So they might be a little distracted from learning. And so these are 2 examples of people who work with underprivileged kids. And then there's Dorothy DeLay, who is a renowned violin teacher at Juilliard. And she got super talented kids that everybody thought was, oh, hello, Ibrahim. Super talented kids, but the problem is that, if you have a fixed mindset and you're super talented at playing the violin, you might think that you can become a superstar and without doing any work because you're so talented, and people can feel very entitled. It's like, who was it that said, was it Yasha Heifetz? I don't remember. It was asked, somebody asked him the way to Carnegie Hall, and he said, practice, practice, practice. So the interesting thing about Dorothy DeLay, though, is that many teachers at Juilliard would sort of mentally weed out the students that they weren't going to bother with. Like, very fixed mindset, a student would come in and they would look at their performance and they would just assume that that's what they got, and they couldn't really get any better, and if the student had any sort of issue, they would just basically give up on them. But Dorothy DeLay was someone who wanted to see kids grow, students grow. She said her teaching was about watching something grow before her very eyes. And actually this guy who was her mentor originally at Juilliard, and then he tried to get her fired, he told her, oh, he has no ear, don't waste your time on him. And she was wasting too much time on students that he didn't consider worthy of this. So he actually tried to get her fired, can you imagine? And there's a quote here from her, which is kind of interesting given what I just told you about this guy who tried to get her fired. I think it's too easy for a teacher to say, oh, this child wasn't born with it, so I won't waste my time. Too many teachers hide their own lack of ability behind that statement. Ooh, burn. Okay, so teachers with a fixed mindset create an atmosphere of judgment. If you're constantly afraid of being judged, it's really hard to do your best work. These teachers look at students' beginning performance and decide who's smart and who's dumb. Then they give up on the dumb ones. And this is how stereotypes work. There's some of these teachers know which students to give up on before they've even met them, just because of stereotypes about what group they belong to. This is what we call this nowadays in 2020. This book was written in 2006. In 2020, this is part of what we call systemic racism. The assumption that people are not going to be as successful purely because of who they are, with no idea of what their abilities are or how they can grow, right? So great teachers have high standards, okay? It's not about dumbing things down, on the contrary, but they nurture their students in the belief that they can do it. But the thing is that they don't just say, oh, you can do it, and just leave them to, to struggle. They teach them how to achieve these high standards, and that's where the really hard work comes in for the teachers. Okay, like she describes in this book that Rafe Esquith, he does this, it's what they call differentiated instruction. Like for every student, for every class, they would figure, like if they were reading something, it would figure out, which student could do something that was more advanced and which student was more shy and would probably do better to start with something a little easier and then develop into doing the more complicated stuff. These are hours of work for a teacher. And a lot of teachers don't want to do that. They just want to stand in front of the class and regurgitate. That's a lot. Doing that is actually harder in some ways because people get burned out and they have discipline issues because they're not growing and they're not really interested in helping their students grow. They're just standing there, saying whatever they have to say and living for the weekend. It's not a good thing. The other thing is that she says that when students don't know how to do something and others do, the gap seems unbridgeable. This is true not only for students. This can be true in any profession. If you are results triggered, as Ray Higdon calls it, if you see other people doing something and you don't seem able to do it, it can seem like you'll just never be able to do it. But she says some educators try to reassure their students that they're just fine as they are. Growth-minded teachers tell students the truth, and then they give them the tools to close the gap. It's really interesting. And she says, growth-minded teachers are not saints, but they love to learn. They don't think of themselves as finished products, just standing in front of a group of people and imparting their wisdom. They are fascinated by the challenge and reaching and igniting the minds of their students. Then there's a whole section in the book about coaches. She talks about 3 different coaches, like Bobby Knight, who apparently had a very fixed mindset, and of course there's always John Wooden, who is the example of a growth-minded coach. And then she goes on to talk about something called a false growth mindset. But I think this is all the time I have right now. I need to move on to do other things. So I just wanted to thank you for listening. And again, if you would like access to this Google Doc with my notes for all of this stuff from this book, Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck, then just drop me a message. I'll be happy to give you access to it. And have a great day. Have a great weekend. If you're in the United States, happy Independence Day. And talk to you again soon. Bye.